right, so start with the domain. Sine and cosine have a domain of all real numbers, so this function is always defined. All right, so now we can start talking about where it's 0, positive, and negative. As I was saying before, it's nice to get your trig equation all down to the same trig function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a trig identity on sine squared. We know that sine squared plus cosine squared is 1. Therefore, sine squared will be 1 minus cosine squared. So trig identity. Sine squared is 1 minus cosine squared plus cosine minus 1. Distribute the 2. Like terms, 2 minus 1 would be 1. And we care where this is. All right, so turns out this is a quadratic equation again. We see a cosine squared term, a cosine to the power 1 term, and a constant. So this is quadratic in cosine, so I'm going to substitute a u for a cosine. All right. Under this substitution, this equation becomes I'm going to start by factoring a negative out. I don't like factoring with negative coefficients of u squareds. Factor the quadratic. All right. Set each factor to 0. U would be negative 1/2. U is the same as cosine. So we get cosine equals negative 1/2. Set the second factor to 0. We get u equals to 1. That is simply cosine equals 1. All right. Cosine equals negative 1/2. We need to get the solutions to this. So what I'm going to do is draw triangles again. We know that cosine is an x value divided by a hypotenuse. So in the xy plane, I will draw 2 triangles, each with an x value negative 1, each with a hypotenuse of 2. I can do that over here. And I can do that down here. Pythagoras gives us the third circle. All right, so we see we're dealing with the 1, 2 square root of 3 triangle. This one here. And it looks like the angles we care about, these reference angles here and here, these are the angles opposite of the side of magnitude root 3. So we go to our triangle, we find the side of magnitude root 3, and we see the angle opposite is pi over 3. So each one of these reference angles is pi thirds. So what are the solutions? Well, starting here, traverse around, you've gone a total of pi radians. Then what you would have to do is you would have to backtrack by pi over 3, and that would produce an angle of pi minus pi over 3 to pi over 3. starting here, go around to pi, and then keep going by another pi over 3. That would give you an angle of pi plus pi over 3, 4 pi over 3. All right, cosine x equals 1. Well, there's no triangle for that. You're going to need to know the graph. We see that cosine is 1 when the argument is either 0 or 2 pi. So cosine is 1 when x is 0 or 2 pi. So these are the roots. Plotting the roots on a number line. So we have 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3. Pick something between 0 and 2 pi over 3. I'm going to choose pi over 2 and plug it in. So let's see. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the factored form here, but I'm going to replace my u with the cosine. So we'll have negative 2 cosine plus 1 and cosine minus 1. This is the factored form of our function. Choosing pi over 2, notice cosine of pi over 2. Cosine of pi over 2 is 0. So if x is pi over 2, we'll have a negative here from out front. If x is pi over 2, cosine is 0, plus 1 is positive. 0 minus 1 is negative. 2 negatives and a positive will multiply to be positive. So our function is positive. Between 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3 lives pi. And from the graph, we see that cosine of pi is negative 1. So cosine of pi is negative 1. So we'll get a negative from out front. Cosine of pi is negative 1, so we get negative 2 plus 1. That would be negative. Cosine of pi is negative 1, so negative 1 minus 1 is negative, and the product of 3 negatives is negative. All right, between 4 pi over 3 and 2 pi lives 3 pi over 2. And from the graph, we see that cosine of 3 pi over 2 is 0. So if cosine is 0, we would get a negative from out front. 0 plus 1 would be positive. 0 minus 1 would be negative. 2 negatives and a positive multiplied to be a positive. So we can say that f is greater than 0. Don't include 0 because that was one of our roots. So do not include 0 up to 2 pi over 3 union 4 pi over 3 to 2 pi, and again, don't include 2 pi because our function is 0 there. And f is less than 0 in the middle from 2 pi over 3 to 4 pi over 3.